The Finnish farmer knelt in the snow, his slight frame nearly invisible against the white landscape of the Kola River sector. It was December 1939, and the temperature had plummeted to -40 degrees Celsius, cold so extreme that rifle bolts froze. Machine guns jammed, and exhaling breath could instantly give away a soldier's position. The man wore no special uniform, no insignia of rank. His rifle was a standard Finnish Army M2830, a variant of the Soviet Mosin Nagant, iron sights only, no scope. He had packed snow around his position to minimize the muzzle flash when he fired, and he kept snow in his mouth so his breath would not form a vapor cloud in the frigid air. Before him, through the sparse forest and across frozen ground, Soviet soldiers advanced in numbers that seemed inexhaustible. He took aim, controlled his breathing, and fired. 700 meters away, a Soviet officer fell. The Finnish soldier worked the bolt, chambered another round, acquired another target, and fired again. Then again. In the span of minutes, multiple Soviet soldiers lay dead or dying in the snow, and their comrades had no idea where the shots were coming from. The Finnish soldier remained motionless, patient, waiting for the next opportunity. This scene would repeat itself, day after day, week after week, throughout one of the coldest winters in recorded history, during one of the most lopsided conflicts of the 20th century, the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union. The Finnish soldier's name was Simo Häyhä. He was 33 years old, stood just over 5 feet tall, and weighed perhaps 150 pounds. Before the war, he had been a farmer in the municipality of Rautjärvi in southeastern Finland, living a quiet rural life of agriculture and hunting. He had served his mandatory military service years earlier, demonstrating exceptional marksmanship but otherwise appearing unremarkable. Nothing about his background suggested he would become the deadliest individual sniper in military history, a man whose exploits would terrify an entire Soviet army, and whose name would become synonymous with death in the frozen forests of the Finnish-Soviet border. To understand Simo Häyhä's extraordinary story, one must first understand the impossible situation Finland faced in the winter of 1939-1940. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with overwhelming force, over 450,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, and complete air superiority. The pretext for invasion was complex. Rooted in Soviet strategic concerns about the proximity of the Finnish border to Leningrad, and in Joseph Stalin's broader expansionist ambitions following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany. The Soviets expected a quick victory. Finland's total military strength numbered approximately 180,000 soldiers with minimal armor, limited artillery, and virtually no air force. Soviet planners anticipated conquering Finland within weeks, perhaps days. But Finland did not collapse. Instead, Finnish forces mounted a defense that would shock the world and demonstrate that superior numbers and equipment do not guarantee victory when fighting a determined enemy on their own terrain in conditions that neutralize conventional military advantages. The Finnish strategy combined conventional defense with guerrilla tactics, exploiting superior knowledge of the terrain, exceptional individual soldier skills, particularly in skiing and marksmanship, and the brutal winter conditions that Finnish soldiers understood intimately while Soviet troops found nearly unbearable. The Karelian Isthmus and the regions near Lake Ladoga became killing grounds, where Soviet mechanized columns found themselves channeled onto narrow roads through dense forest and frozen swamps. Finnish ski troops, moving silently through forests where Soviet vehicles could not follow, would strike suddenly and vanish into the wilderness. Small Finnish units would encircle and destroy Soviet formations many times their size in tactics the Finns called mati, named after the Finnish word for a stack of firewood logs, describing how they would cut Soviet columns into sections and systematically destroy each segment. Individual marksmanship became a crucial element of Finnish defensive strategy. Unlike mass armies that emphasized volume of fire and unit-level tactics, the Finnish military tradition emphasized individual soldier excellence, particularly in shooting. Finnish men grew up hunting in forests where game was sparse and ammunition expensive, developing patience and precision. Military training reinforced these skills, producing soldiers who were comfortable operating independently, capable of surviving in extreme winter conditions, and extraordinarily accurate with rifles at ranges where soldiers of other armies would rely on automatic weapons or artillery. Simo Häyhä embodied these qualities to an exceptional degree. He had grown up hunting in the forests around Rautjärvi, spending countless hours in conditions similar to those he would face during the Winter War. He understood cold, snow, forest, and silence. He knew how light changed through winter days, how wind affected bullet trajectory, how to remain motionless for hours. Most critically, he possessed the psychological temperament for solitary hunting of human prey. Patience, focus, emotional control, and the ability to kill repeatedly without hesitation or remorse affecting his performance. When war began, Häyhä was mobilized with his unit, the 6th Company of JR 34, the 34th Infantry Regiment, assigned to defend the Kola River sector. This region, roughly 16 kilometers of front line through dense forest and frozen swamps, became one of the war's most fiercely contested areas. Soviet forces attacked repeatedly, attempting to break through Finnish lines with overwhelming numerical superiority. The Finnish defenders, outnumbered often by 10 to 1 or more, held their positions through individual fighting skill, intimate terrain knowledge, and sheer determination. It was in this desperate defensive struggle that Häyhä would establish his reputation. His role was precisely defined. He was a sniper, tasked with eliminating high-value targets at long range. Soviet officers, machine gun crews, artillery observers, anyone whose death would disrupt Soviet operations. The work required moving between positions, often operating alone or with a single spotter, finding concealment, waiting for targets, and shooting with lethal precision. Success meant staying alive while killing enemies. Failure meant death, and given the treatment Soviet forces often gave to captured Finnish soldiers, death in combat was preferable to capture. Häyhä brought to this role not just marksmanship skills, but a methodical, almost scientific approach to killing. He studied Soviet tactics, learning their patterns of movement and attack. He identified optimal firing positions that offered concealment, clear fields of fire, and escape routes. He calculated ranges to various landmarks in his sectors, eliminating the need for guesswork when targets appeared. He understood that survival depended not just on shooting accurately, but on remaining undetected. That every shot fired revealed his approximate position, requiring immediate relocation or acceptance of counter-sniper fire and artillery bombardment. His weapon choice was deliberate and somewhat unusual. While many snipers preferred scoped rifles for their magnification and precision, Häyhä used standard iron sights on his M28-30 rifle. This choice had multiple rationales. First, he had trained extensively with iron sights and was exceptionally proficient with them. Second, in extreme cold, scoped rifles presented problems. Lenses could fog or frost. The scope's eye relief required a higher head position that increased exposure, and the scope's glint could reveal position. Third, iron sights allowed lower profile and faster target acquisition at the medium ranges where most of his shooting occurred. His proficiency with iron sights was so extreme that he could reliably hit human-sized targets at ranges where most soldiers would consider a scoped rifle necessary. The physical conditions of the Winter War tested soldiers beyond anything most armies had experienced. The winter of 1939-1940 was exceptionally severe, with temperatures regularly dropping to minus 30 or 40 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, metal becomes brittle, lubricants freeze, exposed skin suffers frostbite in minutes, and human endurance is measured in hours without shelter. Soldiers on both sides suffered terribly, but Soviet forces, often inadequately equipped for extreme cold, unfamiliar with winter forest operations, and unable to build proper field fortifications in frozen ground, suffered catastrophically. Frostbite casualties among Soviet units sometimes exceeded combat casualties. Häyhä, by contrast, was in his element. He dressed in layers of warm clothing covered by white winter camouflage. He knew how to build snow shelters, how to keep extremities warm, how to eat and drink enough to maintain body heat. He could remain motionless in snow for hours, something Soviet soldiers found nearly impossible. His small stature, usually no advantage, became an asset. He could conceal himself in positions too cramped for larger men, and he presented a minimal target profile. The same forests and snow that tormented Soviet soldiers provided him perfect hunting ground. His daily routine during active periods was methodical. He would move to a firing position before dawn, sometimes spending hours preparing the position, clearing sight lines, packing snow to prevent muzzle flash from disturbing the snow and revealing his position, arranging his concealment, calculating ranges. He would then wait, sometimes for hours, watching Soviet positions for targets of opportunity. When targets presented themselves, an officer using binoculars, a machine gun crew setting up a position, soldiers gathering for an attack, he would fire, typically one shot per target, then either relocate immediately or remain frozen in position depending on circumstances. The number of targets he engaged in a day varied enormously based on Soviet activity levels and tactical situations, but Finnish military records document days where he killed 20 or more Soviet soldiers. The psychological impact of his shooting extended far beyond the physical casualties he inflicted. Soviet soldiers in the Kola sector developed what might be described as sniper paranoia. They knew a Finnish sniper, they called him Belaya Smrt, the White Death, was killing their comrades with uncanny consistency. Any movement during daylight risked instant death from an unseen shooter. Officers were particularly vulnerable, creating command and control problems as junior officers and NCOs became reluctant to perform duties that exposed them to sniper fire. The stress of knowing that an invisible enemy might kill you at any moment, that no position was safe, that death could arrive without warning, created psychological trauma that affected unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. By January 1940, Soviet military intelligence had identified that a particularly effective sniper was operating in the Kola sector. Reports from multiple units described exceptionally accurate long-range fire that was eliminating officers and specialists at an alarming rate. The Soviets responded as military forces typically do to extraordinary threats. They devoted resources to eliminating the threat. Counter-sniper teams were deployed specifically to hunt Häyhä. Artillery fire was directed at suspected sniper positions. Rewards were reportedly offered for killing or capturing the Finnish sniper who had become a legend among Soviet forces, though verification of specific reward amounts is difficult from available sources. The Soviet counter-sniper efforts faced multiple challenges. First, they were attempting to locate and kill a single individual operating across a 16-kilometer front through dense forest and varied terrain. Häyhä did not operate from fixed positions but moved constantly, sometimes using a position only once before abandoning it. Second, the extreme cold and harsh conditions that Häyhä was accustomed to severely degraded Soviet operational effectiveness. Soviet snipers, while well-trained, were operating in conditions foreign to their experience and with equipment not optimized for extreme winter operations. Third, Häyhä possessed fundamental advantages. He was defending familiar terrain. He could choose when and where to engage, and he could simply become invisible by ceasing fire, while Soviet snipers had to actively hunt him, exposing themselves to danger. The counter-sniper duel that developed represented warfare reduced to its most personal and primitive form, individual hunters trying to kill each other, using all their skill and cunning, with death as the price of error. Soviet snipers would study where kills had occurred, trying to deduce Häyhä's likely positions. They would set up in concealed locations, watching for muzzle flash or movement. Some reportedly used other soldiers as bait, waiting for Häyhä to shoot so they could identify his position from the muzzle flash or sound. These tactics occasionally succeeded against other Finnish snipers, but appear to have been ineffective against Häyhä, who combined exceptional fieldcraft with careful discipline about when and how he engaged targets. The Soviets also employed artillery against suspected sniper positions. When a Finnish sniper kill was reported, artillery fire would saturate the area where the shot originated. This tactic was occasionally effective against less skilled snipers who remained too long in position, but Häyhä's practice of immediately relocating after shooting or remaining completely motionless in well-constructed positions allowed him to survive repeated artillery bombardments. The Finnish defensive positions in the Kola sector were well fortified with bunkers and trenches, providing shelter where snipers could retreat when Soviet artillery responded to their fire. Finnish military records from the Winter War documented Häyhä's confirmed kills with remarkable specificity. Each kill had to be confirmed by an officer or multiple witnesses to be officially recorded. The Finnish military was systematic about maintaining accurate casualty counts both for their own forces and for recorded enemy casualties. By the war's end in mid-March 1940, official records credited Häyhä with over 500 confirmed sniper kills using his rifle. Additionally, he was credited with approximately 200 kills using a Suomi KP-31 submachine gun during close quarters combat when Soviet forces overran Finnish positions and fighting became a desperate, close-range battle for survival. These numbers are extraordinary, almost beyond belief. Yet they are documented in Finnish military archives and have been verified by multiple historians. To put them in perspective, the highest-scoring Allied sniper of World War II was Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, with 309 confirmed kills over her entire wartime service spanning multiple years. American sniper Chuck Mulhenny, the highest-scoring U.S. Marine Corps sniper, recorded 103 confirmed kills during the Vietnam War. Häyhä achieved over 500 confirmed kills in approximately 100 days of active combat, an average of 5 per day, though the actual pattern was highly variable, with some days recording 20 or more kills and other days recording none. Several factors explain these exceptional numbers beyond Häyhä's personal skills. First, target availability was extraordinarily high. The Soviets were attacking repeatedly with massive numerical superiority, presenting abundant targets. Second, engagement ranges in the forested terrain were typically 150 to 400 meters. Distances where an expert marksman with iron sights could be extremely accurate, but where massed Soviet infantry offered multiple targets in quick succession. Third, Finnish defensive tactics relied heavily on individual marksmanship, giving snipers like Häyhä excellent firing positions and support. Fourth, the entire duration of the Winter War was only 105 days, and Häyhä was in active combat for most of this period, creating a compressed time frame where daily averages became very high. The psychological dimensions of Häyhä's effectiveness extended beyond the immediate casualties he inflicted. Soviet soldiers knew about the White Death. Stories circulated about the Finnish sniper who never missed, who could kill at impossible ranges, who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. These stories, like all combat legends, grew with each retelling, but they were grounded in terrifying reality. There was indeed a Finnish sniper in the Kola sector who was killing Soviet soldiers with exceptional consistency. The knowledge that this legendary figure might be watching created constant stress for Soviet forces operating in his sector. Soviet tactical adaptations to the sniper threat revealed its significance. Units began moving primarily at night or during limited visibility conditions. Officers became reluctant to use binoculars or expose themselves while observing Finnish positions. Attack formations dispersed more than doctrine recommended to avoid presenting concentrated targets. These adaptations, while sensible responses to the sniper threat, degraded Soviet combat effectiveness. Night operations are less effective than daylight operations. Command and control suffers when officers cannot properly observe, and dispersed formations lose the mutual support that concentrated force provides. Häyhä's own psychology during this period remains somewhat mysterious, as he was by nature reserved and gave relatively few interviews about his experiences. Accounts from soldiers who served with him describe a quiet, modest individual who did not boast about his kills or seem to take pleasure in them. He approached sniping as work that needed doing with the same methodical attention he brought to farming. Fellow soldiers noted his calmness under fire, his patience, and his willingness to take risks to achieve good firing positions. He was wounded several times during the Winter War, minor wounds, that did not prevent him from returning to action, demonstrating that he was not immune to the dangers he faced but was willing to accept risk as inherent to his role. The physical demands of his service were extreme, operating in -40-degree temperatures, often lying motionless in snow for hours, required extraordinary physical toughness. Frostbite was a constant risk. The stress of being constantly hunted by enemy counter-snipers and subjected to artillery fire created psychological pressure that most people would find unbearable. Yet Häyhä continued day after day through the entire winter campaign. His ability to maintain performance under these conditions speaks to exceptional mental and physical resilience beyond even his remarkable marksmanship skills. His service was not without close calls. On several occasions, Soviet artillery fire came close enough to his positions to wound him with shrapnel or concussion. Counter-sniper fire apparently came close enough that he had to abandon positions rapidly. Soviet forces overran Finnish positions multiple times during the winter, requiring Häyhä to fight at close quarters with his submachine gun rather than as a sniper. The approximately 200 submachine gun kills credited to him occurred during these desperate close-range battles. Each time he survived situations that killed many of his comrades, then returned to sniping when Finnish forces re-established their defensive lines. The tactical situation in the Kola sector remained desperate throughout the winter. Despite heroic Finnish resistance, Soviet numerical superiority was overwhelming. Häyhä and his fellow soldiers were fighting a delaying action, attempting to hold defensive lines long enough for political solutions to be found or for Soviet losses to become so severe that continuing the invasion became strategically untenable. Finnish forces never had illusions about defeating the Soviet Union militarily. The goal was to make victory so costly that the Soviets would accept a negotiated settlement rather than continue sacrificing men for limited territorial gains. By early March 1940, the Winter War was approaching its end. The Soviets, having suffered catastrophic casualties, estimates suggest 126,000 to 167,000 Soviet soldiers killed compared to approximately 26,000 Finnish deaths, were nevertheless gradually overwhelming Finnish defenses through sheer numerical superiority and artillery firepower. The Finnish government was negotiating terms of peace, knowing that continued resistance was ultimately futile. But in the Kola sector, Häyhä continued his deadly work, eliminating Soviet soldiers with mechanical efficiency until the war's final days. On March 6, 1940, 9 days before the war would end, Simo Häyhä's extraordinary service was abruptly interrupted. The circumstances remain somewhat unclear from available sources, but the generally accepted account indicates he was struck in the jaw by an explosive bullet or shell fragment while in a forward position. The injury was catastrophic. The left side of his face was essentially destroyed, his jaw was shattered, and by some accounts he lost consciousness immediately and was not expected to survive. Comrades evacuated him from the front line, carrying him through snow and enemy fire to a field hospital, then to more capable medical facilities as his condition was assessed. When Simo Häyhä regained consciousness 11 days later on March 13, 1940, the Winter War was ending. Finland and the Soviet Union would sign the Moscow Peace Treaty that day, ending hostilities with Finland, ceding approximately 11% of its territory to the Soviet Union, but remaining independent, a far better outcome than the complete conquest Stalin had apparently intended. Häyhä's recovery had coincided almost exactly with his nation's survival, though he would not return to service. His war was over. The injury he had sustained would have killed most men outright. That he survived at all was remarkable, and likely reflected both his extraordinary physical toughness and the quality of medical care he received, despite battlefield conditions. However, survival came at terrible cost. The left side of his face was permanently disfigured. He required multiple reconstructive surgeries. He would carry the physical marks of his service for the remaining 62 years of his life. He lived until 2002, dying at age 96, one of the last veterans of the Winter War. During his recovery and in the years immediately following the war, Häyhä received recognition for his service. He was promoted from corporal to second lieutenant, a significant honor given that he had not attended officer training and battlefield commissions were unusual in the Finnish military. He was awarded numerous decorations, including the prestigious Cross of Kola, a medal specifically created to honor the defenders of the Kola sector, where the Finns had fought so desperately. However, Häyhä remained characteristically modest about his service, rarely discussing his wartime experiences, and deflecting attention when others tried to celebrate his achievements. The historical assessment of Häyhä's contribution to the Winter War extends beyond simply counting his confirmed kills, though those numbers remain extraordinary. His tactical impact on the Kola sector operations was significant. Soviet forces in his operational area faced consistent attrition of leaders and specialists, degrading unit effectiveness and creating psychological pressure that affected combat performance. More broadly, snipers like Häyhä contributed to the overall Finnish defensive strategy that relied on individual soldier excellence to offset Soviet numerical superiority. The Winter War demonstrated that well-trained, motivated soldiers fighting on familiar terrain under conditions they understood could achieve effects far beyond what their numbers suggested. The broader strategic outcome of the Winter War vindicated the Finnish defensive strategy. Although Finland lost territory and suffered heavy casualties, the nation retained its independence at a time when Soviet Union was annexing neighboring states. The Red Army's poor performance in Finland, suffering massive casualties, demonstrating operational incompetence, and failing to achieve quick victory despite overwhelming superiority, had significant strategic implications. Soviet military weaknesses revealed during the Winter War influenced Adolf Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941, as German military analysts concluded that the Red Army was poorly led and ineffective. This assessment proved partially correct initially, but ultimately catastrophically wrong, though that outcome lay in the future. For Simo Häyhä personally, the post-war years represented a return to the quiet farming life he had known before the war. He purchased a farm in Ruokolahti in southeastern Finland and lived there for most of his remaining years. Hunting and farming, much as he had before the war, transformed him into a legend. He married, though reportedly had no children. He became involved in dog breeding, particularly of moose-hunting dogs, and in competitive shooting sports, where his marksmanship skills remained evident despite his injury. He lived to see Finland survive not only the Winter War, but also the continuation war against the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1944, and the subsequent Cold War period when Finland maintained precarious neutrality between East and West. As decades passed and the Winter War receded into history, interest in Häyhä's story periodically resurged. Military historians studying sniper tactics inevitably examined his achievements. His confirmed kill total remains officially recognized as the highest in military history for any individual sniper, a record that stands over 80 years after the events. Various books and documentaries have told his story, though Häyhä himself gave relatively few interviews and apparently never wrote detailed memoirs of his experiences. The accounts that exist come primarily from military records, from fellow soldiers who served with him, and from brief interviews he gave in later life. In those rare interviews, Häyhä demonstrated the same modest, reserved personality that characterized him throughout his life. When asked how he became such an effective sniper, he typically offered practical answers: practice, knowledge of the terrain, patience. When asked about the psychological aspects of killing over 500 men, he reportedly said simply that he did what was necessary. He was a soldier defending his homeland against invasion. There is no evidence he experienced what would later be termed post-traumatic stress disorder, though given his reserved nature and the cultural context of Finland in that era, such internal struggles would likely not have been publicly acknowledged even if they existed. The military lessons derived from Häyhä's service have influenced sniper doctrine and training in numerous armed forces. His success with iron sights challenged assumptions that scoped rifles were essential for sniping, demonstrating that exceptional fundamentals, proper breathing, trigger control, position, and most critically, fieldcraft and camouflage, could produce extraordinary results. His tactics of constant movement, patient target selection, and immediate relocation after shooting became standard elements of sniper doctrine. His ability to function effectively in extreme environmental conditions emphasized that snipers must be capable of operating in whatever conditions exist. That comfort and convenience are luxuries that cannot compromise effectiveness. Modern military snipers study Häyhä's tactics, though they operate in a dramatically changed technological environment. Contemporary snipers benefit from advanced optics, laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, ghillie suits designed with scientific understanding of visual perception, and extensive institutional knowledge about sniping accumulated over decades. Yet the fundamental principles Häyhä demonstrated remain relevant. Patience, fieldcraft, understanding of terrain and conditions, psychological resilience, and exceptional marksmanship fundamentals. Technology enhances capability but does not replace the human skills at sniping's core. The psychological dimensions of Häyhä's effectiveness, the White Death legend that terrorized Soviet forces, illustrate an enduring aspect of warfare. Individual warriors who demonstrate extraordinary capability and survive repeated combat create myths that extend beyond their physical presence. Enemy forces aware that such an individual is operating in their sector must account for this threat, diverting resources and attention, creating stress and fear that degrade combat effectiveness. This psychological dimension multiplies the tactical impact of the individual's actual kills. Häyhä killed over 500 Soviet soldiers directly, but his presence likely affected the behavior and effectiveness of thousands more who knew of him and feared him. The ethical dimensions of celebrating a sniper who killed hundreds of men merit consideration. Modern sensibilities often struggle with lionizing killing, even in legitimate defense. Yet Häyhä's case seems relatively clear morally. He was a soldier defending his homeland against unprovoked invasion by a totalitarian regime. Finland had not attacked the Soviet Union. The war was imposed on Finland. Häyhä's killing was done in uniform against military targets, following the laws of war as understood at that time. The alternative to his effective defense would have been Soviet victory, occupation, and likely absorption of Finland into the Soviet Union with attendant loss of Finnish independence and the human suffering that Soviet occupation typically entailed. Moreover, Häyhä's effectiveness arguably saved lives. Each Soviet soldier he killed from distance was one who did not die in close quarters battle that would have killed Finnish soldiers as well. His contribution to Finnish defensive success helped convince the Soviets to negotiate, rather than continue fighting until Finland was completely conquered, an outcome that would have resulted in far more deaths on both sides. From this perspective, Häyhä's efficient killing at distance represented a more humane form of warfare than the close-quarters slaughter that characterized much of the Winter War's combat. The physical conditions under which Häyhä operated, temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius, lying in snow for hours, operating with minimal logistic support, tested human endurance at its limits. Modern military cold weather training, developed through decades of experience and scientific understanding of human physiology in extreme cold, emphasizes that operations at temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius require specialized equipment, techniques, and strict time limits on exposure. Häyhä operated effectively in conditions substantially worse than this, with equipment far inferior to modern cold weather gear for extended periods. His physical toughness represented an extreme outlier even among soldiers known for toughness. The cultural context of Finland in the 1930s and 1940s helps explain how individuals like Häyhä were produced. Finnish culture emphasized self-reliance, competence in outdoor skills, and a concept called sisu, roughly translatable as stoic determination, grit, or resilience in the face of adversity. Growing up in rural Finland meant developing practical skills for survival in a harsh environment. The hunting tradition meant that rural Finnish men grew up familiar with rifles, comfortable in forests, and practiced at patience and precision. Mandatory military service provided professional military skills built on this cultural foundation. The result was a population that could produce soldiers capable of extraordinary performance when their homeland survival demanded it. Häyhä's story has entered Finnish national consciousness as a symbol of the Winter War and Finnish resistance. He represents the ordinary citizen who, when his country needed him, demonstrated extraordinary capability. His modesty and return to simple civilian life after the war align with Finnish cultural values that prize competence over boasting, action over words. He became a national hero without seeking fame, a warrior who served when needed, then returned peacefully to civilian life when the crisis passed. This narrative resonates powerfully in Finnish culture and has contributed to his enduring legendary status. Internationally, Häyhä's story fascinates military historians, firearms enthusiasts, and those interested in individual achievement under extreme circumstances. His name appears in discussions of history's greatest warriors, greatest marksmen, and most effective individual combatants. Books, articles, documentaries, and even fictional works inspired by his story have introduced him to audiences far beyond Finland. He has become one of the few Winter War participants widely known internationally, his story transcending the relatively obscure conflict, where it occurred. The reliability of the specific numbers attributed to Häyhä, over 500 confirmed sniper kills, sometimes generates skepticism among those unfamiliar with the documentation. However, Finnish military records were methodically maintained, and the confirmation requirements were strict. The extraordinary number reflects the extraordinary circumstances: abundant targets, relatively short engagement ranges, exceptional personal skill, and sustained operations over approximately 100 days. Comparable daily averages occurred with other snipers during the Winter War, though none sustained them as long or achieved as high a total as Häyhä. The numbers, while extraordinary, are historically documented and accepted by serious military historians who have examined the available evidence. Simo Häyhä died on April 1, 2002, at age 96, in a veterans' nursing home in Hämeenä, Finland. He had outlived virtually all his fellow Winter War veterans, carrying his memories and his scars through 6 decades of post-war life. By the time of his death, he had become a legendary figure in military history, though he had never sought that status. His funeral was attended by Finnish military officials and veterans representatives, acknowledging his service and his unique place in Finnish military history. His legacy extends across multiple dimensions. For military professionals, he represents the apex of individual sniper effectiveness, a demonstration of what is possible when exceptional skill meets optimal conditions. For Finns, he symbolizes the Winter War's spirit, ordinary people achieving extraordinary things to preserve their nation's independence. For those interested in human performance under extreme conditions, he illustrates how individuals can function effectively in circumstances that seem beyond human endurance. The farmhouse where he lived his post-war life still stands, a modest dwelling for a man whose achievements were anything but modest. His rifle, the M2830 with which he recorded over 500 confirmed kills, is preserved in a Finnish museum, a physical artifact of his extraordinary service. Photographs of him from before his injury show a compact, unassuming man with a slight smile, nothing in his appearance suggesting the lethal capability he possessed. Photographs from after his recovery show the terrible price he paid, the left side of his face scarred and disfigured from the injury that nearly killed him. The questions his story raises are profound. What combination of genetics, upbringing, culture, training, and circumstance produces an individual capable of such exceptional performance? Could Häyhä have achieved similar results in different circumstances? Or did his effectiveness require the specific conditions of the Winter War, the terrain he knew intimately, the extreme cold he understood, the desperate defensive situation that demanded maximum individual contribution? Would he have been equally effective in the deserts of North Africa or the jungles of the Pacific? These questions cannot be definitively answered, but they illustrate that exceptional performance typically results from optimal alignment of individual capability with circumstances that allow that capability to be fully expressed. For contemporary military forces, Häyhä's legacy lives in the ongoing emphasis on individual marksmanship, in the understanding that technology enhances but does not replace fundamental soldier skills, and in the recognition that individuals can have strategic impact. Modern special operations forces, particularly sniper units, study historical examples like Häyhä to understand what is possible and to inspire current practitioners. The standards of sniper training in many militaries reflect lessons learned from Winter War snipers, the importance of fieldcraft, patience, adaptability to harsh conditions, and psychological resilience. The broader question of what Simo Häyhä's story means returns us to fundamental truths about warfare and human nature. War tests human beings at the extremes of physical and psychological capability. It reveals what individuals are capable of achieving under conditions of life and death stress. It shows that courage, skill, and determination can accomplish things that seem impossible. Häyhä's story is remarkable not because he killed many men. War is full of killing, but because of how he did it. With precision, consistency, and effectiveness that reached levels rarely if ever matched, under conditions of extreme hardship. While remaining psychologically intact and morally grounded, he was, fundamentally, a simple man thrust into extraordinary circumstances who responded with extraordinary performance. He never claimed to be special or heroic. When asked about his achievements, he emphasized that he was simply doing his job, defending his homeland the best way he knew. This modesty, this refusal to glorify his killing despite its military necessity and effectiveness, speaks to a moral clarity often absent in discussions of warfare. He understood that killing, even in legitimate defense, is not something to celebrate, but something to be done when necessary and then left behind when circumstances allow. The frozen forests of the Kola River sector, where Simo Häyhä waged his solitary war against the Soviet invasion, are quiet now. Trees have grown where men fought and died. Snow still falls each winter, covering the ground where over 500 Soviet soldiers fell to his precisely aimed shots. The physical scars of war have healed, as physical scars do. But the memory remains of a small Finnish farmer who became the deadliest sniper in history, who terrified an army, who helped save his nation, and who then returned quietly to the life he knew before war interrupted it. In an age of precision weapons, satellite surveillance, and drone strikes, an age where killing can be done remotely by operators thousands of miles from their targets. Simo Häyhä's story reminds us that warfare was once more personal, more immediate, more dependent on individual human capability. His effectiveness required being physically present in the killing zone, exposed to enemy fire, enduring the same harsh conditions as his targets. There was nothing abstract or remote about his war. He saw the men he killed. He shared their cold, their danger, their suffering, and he survived, physically scarred but spiritually intact, to live a long life after the guns fell silent. The man who never missed became the man who could never forget, carrying his wartime experiences through 6 decades of peace. He did not speak much about those 100 days in the winter of 1939 to 1940, when he killed more enemy soldiers than any other individual sniper in history. Perhaps he understood that some experiences transcend words, that the reality of what he did and what was done to him could not be adequately expressed in interviews or memoirs. Or perhaps he simply saw no point in reliving what was past, preferring to focus on the life he had after the war rather than the legend he had become during it. Simo Häyhä was not superhuman. He was a man, smaller than average, quiet, modest, competent. But in the crucible of the Winter War, under conditions that tested human endurance to its limits, he demonstrated capability that seemed superhuman. He became a legend, though he never sought that status. He became a symbol, though he remained simply himself. And he became a reminder that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, individuals matter, that one person in the right place and time, with the right skills and determination, can change the course of battles and inspire nations. The White Death, they called him. And death he brought to hundreds of invaders threatening his homeland. But he also brought something else: hope to defenders who faced impossible odds, fear to enemies who thought themselves invincible, and proof that courage and skill can prevail against overwhelming force. In the end, Simo Häyhä's greatest achievement was not the number of men he killed, but that he helped ensure his nation survived to remain free. Everything else, the records, the legend, the fame, was secondary to that fundamental purpose. He was a soldier who did his duty extraordinarily well, then lived the rest of his life as he had begun it, as a farmer, a hunter, a quiet man who preferred the company of forests and dogs to crowds and celebration. His story endures because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature, the capacity of individuals to rise to challenges that seem insurmountable, to perform at levels that defy expectation, to maintain humanity even while engaged in the inhumanity of war. In an era when warfare increasingly emphasized mass, mechanization, and industrial production of violence, Simo Häyhä represented an older tradition, the individual warrior whose personal skill could tip the balance of battles. He was perhaps the last great exemplar of this tradition before warfare fully transitioned to the technological, systematic character it would assume in later decades. The young soldiers who serve as snipers in modern militaries, whether in conventional forces or special operations units, study Häyhä's example not to replicate his specific tactics. The circumstances that made those tactics optimal no longer exist in most modern conflicts, but to understand the mindset, discipline, and dedication required for excellence in their profession. They learn that being an effective sniper requires more than just shooting accurately. It demands patience to wait motionless for hours or days for the right target. It requires physical toughness to operate in whatever conditions exist without complaint or degraded performance. It demands psychological resilience to kill repeatedly without losing emotional control or moral grounding. It requires intelligence to understand terrain, predict enemy behavior, and adapt tactics to changing circumstances. These qualities, patience, toughness, resilience, intelligence, are not unique to snipers. They represent excellence in military service generally, and indeed in many human endeavors. What made Häyhä exceptional was not that he possessed these qualities, but the extraordinary degree to which he possessed them and his ability to maintain them under conditions of extreme stress over an extended period. Many soldiers are brave for a moment, effective for a day, or resilient through a single difficult experience. Häyhä maintained peak performance for over 3 months while being actively hunted by enemy forces, operating in life-threatening cold, and witnessing constant death around him. The toll this experience took on him psychologically, beyond the physical wounds that marked his face, cannot be fully known. He did not discuss such matters, and the culture and era in which he lived did not encourage such discussion. Modern understanding of combat trauma suggests that even individuals as resilient as Häyhä likely carried psychological scars alongside physical ones. The fact that he returned successfully to civilian life, married, maintained relationships, and lived productively for 6 decades after the war suggests he either was remarkably free of trauma or possessed exceptional ability to compartmentalize and manage it. His engagement in hunting and competitive shooting, activities that required him to continue using firearms and marksmanship, skills associated with his wartime experiences, suggests that he had made peace with his past rather than being haunted by it. The broader historical context reminds us why Häyhä's service mattered. The Winter War was not merely a border dispute or limited conflict, but an existential struggle for Finnish independence. Had the Soviet Union succeeded in conquering Finland quickly as Stalin intended, Finland would likely have suffered the same fate as the Baltic states: incorporation into the Soviet Union, suppression of Finnish culture and independence, and the terror and repression that Soviet occupation entailed. The Finnish resistance, to which snipers like Häyhä contributed significantly, made victory so costly that the Soviets accepted a negotiated settlement instead. Every day that Finnish forces delayed Soviet advances, every Soviet soldier killed defending Finnish positions, contributed to this outcome. In this sense, Häyhä's over 500 confirmed kills represented not just tactical successes, but contributions to Finland's strategic survival. The question of how history should remember Simo Häyhä as a hero, a warrior, a killer, a defender, ultimately depends on perspective and values. Finnish culture clearly views him as a hero, a defender who fought with extraordinary effectiveness when his nation needed him. Military historians recognize him as perhaps the most effective individual sniper in recorded history, a professional soldier who executed his mission with unparalleled skill. Those with pacifist perspectives might struggle with celebrating anyone who killed so many, regardless of circumstances. A balanced assessment perhaps recognizes all these dimensions. Häyhä was a man who killed many other men in circumstances where such killing was legally, morally, and strategically justified, who did so with remarkable effectiveness, who paid a terrible price for his service, and who then lived peacefully for decades after the killing stopped. The preservation of his story serves multiple purposes. For Finland, it maintains national memory of the Winter War and the sacrifices made to preserve independence. For military professionals, it provides education about individual effectiveness in warfare and the capabilities that exceptional soldiers can demonstrate. For historians, it offers a case study in how individuals can influence military outcomes even in an era of mass armies. For general audiences, it provides a compelling narrative of human capability under extreme circumstances, a story of courage, skill, and determination that resonates regardless of one's views on warfare. As the living memory of World War II and its associated conflicts fades, Häyhä was among the last Winter War veterans, and now all are gone. Stories like his become increasingly important for maintaining understanding of what that generation experienced and achieved. The comfortable present that many nations enjoy was purchased at terrible cost by individuals like Häyhä, who fought when fighting was necessary. Remembering their service, understanding what they endured and achieved, helps contemporary societies appreciate the sacrifices made on their behalf and understand the reality of warfare beyond abstract discussions of strategy and policy. The contrast between Häyhä's wartime service and his post-war life illuminates an important truth. Warriors need not be defined permanently by warfare. He was a soldier during the Winter War because circumstances demanded it. When the war ended, he returned to being a farmer because that was the life he preferred. Modern militaries sometimes struggle to help veterans transition from military to civilian identity, but Häyhä apparently made this transition successfully, suggesting that strong pre-military identity and post-war purpose facilitate adjustment. He knew who he was before the war and returned to being that person after it, rather than allowing his warrior identity to consume his entire sense of self. His legacy in Finnish culture extends beyond military history into broader national identity. The Winter War represents a defining moment in Finnish history, the successful defense against Soviet invasion, the demonstration that small nations can resist great powers when defending their own territory, the validation of Finnish character and capability. Häyhä embodies these themes in personal form. He was not a professional soldier or military genius, but an ordinary citizen who, when called upon, demonstrated extraordinary capability. This narrative, that ordinary Finns possess extraordinary potential that emerges when needed, remains powerful in Finnish national consciousness. The technical aspects of his marksmanship continue to interest firearms enthusiasts and shooting sports participants. His success with iron sights at ranges where many modern shooters would consider magnified optics essential demonstrates that fundamental marksmanship skills, proper position, breathing control, trigger management, range estimation, can produce remarkable results. Modern competitive shooters sometimes attempt to replicate his feat of consistently hitting human-sized targets at 300 to 400 meters using only iron sights, discovering that while possible, it requires practice and skill far beyond average shooter capabilities. This realization enhances appreciation for Häyhä's abilities and the countless hours of practice that developed them. The question of whether modern warfare could produce another Simo Häyhä generates interesting speculation. Modern battlefield surveillance, thermal imaging, counter-sniper technologies, and tactics developed specifically to neutralize snipers create a vastly different environment than the Winter War's frozen forests. A sniper attempting to operate as Häyhä did would face threats he never encountered. Thermal scopes that can detect body heat through concealment, drones providing overhead surveillance, sophisticated counter-sniper systems that can instantly locate and engage shooters based on muzzle signature. Whether any individual, regardless of skill, could achieve comparable results in the modern battlefield environment remains doubtful. Häyhä's achievements may represent a high-water mark for individual sniper effectiveness that reflected the specific technological and tactical circumstances of his era. Yet the fundamental principles he demonstrated remain relevant. Future warfare, regardless of technological sophistication, will still involve human beings making decisions under stress, and individual excellence will still matter. The specifics of how that excellence manifests may change. Future snipers might operate drones rather than rifles, engage targets through cyber means rather than bullets, but the underlying qualities of patience, precision, resilience, and dedication will remain valuable. In this sense, Häyhä's legacy transcends the specific methods of his era to represent timeless principles of excellence in military service. For the families of the Soviet soldiers Häyhä killed, the story presumably carries different meaning. Each of his over 500 confirmed kills represented a human being, someone's son, perhaps someone's husband or father. These men died far from home, in brutal conditions, serving a regime that had sent them into a war of aggression against a neighbor. Their deaths contributed to Soviet casualty figures so severe that they embarrassed the Red Army and contributed to Stalin's later purges of military leadership deemed responsible for the Winter War's poor performance. Whether those families ever learned specifically that their loved ones fell to Finnish sniper fire, or knew about the legendary White Death, cannot be determined from available sources. But the human cost of war existed equally on both sides, regardless of which side bore responsibility for starting the conflict. This dimension, the humanity of all combatants, including enemies, adds moral complexity to Häyhä's story. He killed men who were, individually, as human as himself, men who felt cold, feared death, perhaps did not want to be fighting in Finland but had no choice as conscripts in a totalitarian system. Yet those same men, had they succeeded in their invasion, would have ended Finnish independence and likely killed many Finnish civilians and soldiers. The moral calculus of warfare contains these contradictions. The enemy soldier is simultaneously a human being, deserving of sympathy, and a threat that must be eliminated. Häyhä apparently understood and accepted this complexity, killing when necessary without hatred or cruelty, then ceasing to kill when the war ended. In the final analysis, Simo Häyhä's story transcends simple categorization. He was not merely a sniper or a hero or a killer, but all of these and more. A complex human being who responded to extraordinary circumstances with extraordinary performance, paid a terrible price, and then lived a long life shaped but not defined by those 100 days in the winter of 1939-1940. His story reminds us that history is made by individuals, that capability can emerge from unexpected places, that small nations can resist great powers, and that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. The frozen forests of Kola are peaceful now, silent except for wind through pine trees and the sounds of wildlife. The blood that stained the snow has long since melted away. The soldiers who fought there, Finnish defenders and Soviet attackers, have all passed into history. But the memory remains, preserved in records and stories, in monuments and museums, and in the legend of the small Finnish farmer who became the deadliest sniper in history. Simo Häyhä lived 96 years, 33 before the Winter War, 100 days during it and over 61 after it. That final, longest period was the life he chose, quiet, productive, close to the land, among people he loved and pursuits he enjoyed. The middle period, the 100 days of warfare that made him famous, was not chosen but imposed by circumstance. He met that circumstance with courage and competence, then returned gratefully to the life he preferred. Perhaps this is the final lesson of his story, that the measure of a warrior is not just effectiveness in war, but the ability to return successfully to peace, to put down the rifle and pick up the plow, to leave the killing behind when the killing is no longer necessary. He was the man who never missed, the White Death, the sniper who terrified an army. But he was also Simo Häyhä, farmer of Rautjärvi, a man who loved his country and defended it when needed, who survived terrible wounds and lived a long life, who asked no glory and needed no justification. His service spoke for itself, in the confirmed kills recorded in military archives, in the territory his nation retained, in the freedom Finland preserved. Everything else, the legends, the books, the fame, came after. Uninvited but perhaps inevitable, the rifle he used, preserved now in a museum, is just a rifle, metal and wood, mechanisms and sights, a tool for its purpose. What made it legendary was the man who wielded it, the mind that calculated ranges and wind, the hands that steadied it, the discipline that made each shot count. Remove the man and the rifle is unremarkable. Remember the man and the rifle becomes history. Simo Häyhä made history not because he sought it, but because when his nation needed someone to stand in frozen forests and stop an invasion one shot at a time, he stood and he did not miss. For that service, at that cost, in those desperate circumstances, history will remember him as long as stories of courage and skill in warfare are told.